well, dystopian news. I'm not going to exactly sugarcoat it, but here we go. There's a journalist that I follow on Twitter. I follow a few journalists on Twitter, but very cool surfboard. Yeah. I've title of the stream. Yes, I am going to be moving on to the subject matter referenced in the title of the stream. One of the journalists that I follow on Twitter posted a tweet thread, but there's also some news articles from more established media outlets about this. From Erin Reed, she says, "Oh my god, Missouri Attorney General just essentially banned gender-affirming care for most trans adults via emergency rule. Requires 3 years of dysphoria, 18 months of therapy sessions, doesn't allow people with autism or depression to transition. This is what elimination of transgender people looks like." And by the way, the 18 months of therapy sessions, it's like every month or every month and a half or something like that. Hold on. Where is the where is that provision? God damn it. Legal documents are so dense. But anyway, she posted also a screenshot of the emergency rule. Yeah, Missouri, the state of Missouri is now in, I believe it's like stage 8 or something of the 10 stages of genocide, where they start systematically exterminating trans people. Banning people who are autistic or depressed. By the way, there's a significant overlap between autism and depression. So in addition to ableism, what this serves to do is basically catch up in that net anybody who has depression but is undiagnosed. Not that it really matters, because even though it's only a ban in wording for those folks, it is effectively a ban for anybody. Therapy is extremely expensive in the United States. There is no reasonable expectation that anybody could meet the standards of having had dysphoria for 3 consecutive years. Do you know what it's like to hate yourself intensely for 3 consecutive years? That's the kind of shit that drives people to kill themselves. Basically, they're saying, we're going to try to get you to kill yourself for 3 years. And if you survive that, then we'll let you maybe transition. But then you also have to do therapy for 18 straight months for us to even allow it. If I read from, let's see, we have, here we go, Associated Press. Missouri to limit gender-affirming care for minors and adults, so people of all ages. Missouri's Attorney General announced new restrictions on Thursday for gender-affirming care for adults in addition to minors, in a move that is believed to be a first nationally and has advocacy groups threatening to sue. Attorney General Andrew Bailey announced plans to restrict healthcare for transgender people weeks ago, when protests rallied at the Capitol to urge lawmakers to pass a law banning puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries for children. But the discussion was focused on minors, not adults. To a certain extent, but at least it was legal. Yeah. And I don't even think it should be behind a paywall. Like, you know, this is medical care. It's not something that you should be locking behind money. But like, we're so far gone from that even. Clarified in a Missouri AG spokeswoman Madeline Searon clarified in a statement later in the day that adults would also be covered. We have serious concerns about how children are being treated throughout the state, but we believe everyone is entitled to evidence-based medicine and adequate mental health care. This is typical PR language. They don't actually believe this, because if they did, they wouldn't have banned trans care. The evidence supports providing gender-affirming care to trans people, trans youth even. All the evidence in the world backs this up. There shouldn't even be as many roadblocks to it as there are, because people generally know how they want to identify themselves, you know. And in fact, the same roadblocks do not exist for other elective surgeries, such as breast implants, breast reduction, I don't know, knee, hip surgery, whatever, facial feminization surgery for people who are cis. By the way, people can get surgery to make their face look more feminine if there is a woman who's something like, I don't know, a little bit insecure about how they look, and that they're not feminine enough. There is surgery that can be done to address that. And One high-profile cis woman who has done this is not in the United States, but still an example, is J.K. Rowling. The Queen of the TERFs has had gender-affirming surgery. But it is just because such surgeries and such care would be provided to trans people that they are locking them behind a paywall. Hormone blockers, puberty blockers and whatever, are not subject to the same scrutiny, or at least Republicans wouldn't even think twice about them for cis children who are experiencing some of the conditions associated with those. For example, precocious puberty would necessitate the use of that. Republicans wouldn't think twice about it until trans people get involved. And then all of a sudden it's bad for kids. According to them, anyways. The rule, which includes a required 18 months of therapy before receiving gender-affirming healthcare. So that's even worse. It said, okay, so if you survive the 3 years of you wanting to kill yourself, we're going to subject you to another 1.5 years of that. And then after 4.5 years of us putting hurdles in front of you and denying you medical care, then you can transition if you're an adult. And if you don't have autism or depression, which, by the way, means functionally nobody. One of the things about the trans community is that there is a very large proportion of them that are autistic or have depression or have some sort of mental condition that would be caught by this bill. Basically, I want to say, like, given the increased amount of awareness of autism spectrum disorder and depression and whatever, it's basically understood by people with a tangential knowledge of the subject that people who are neurotypical and not depressed are a very small minority. Most people are either depressed or neuroatypical in some way or another, whether that be ADHD or autism or whatever. So this is a roundabout way of saying you're just not allowed to transition. It is kind of like a much more sly and circumspect version of the grandfather clause, which I've talked about before. Basically not denying anybody who was black the right to vote, necessarily, but effectively doing so by saying if your grandfather could not vote, you cannot vote, knowing full well that many black people at the time, freedmen, had grandfathers who were slaves. And by saying that, sure, you can transition as long as you don't have autism or depression, they are effectively alienating every single person who would be looking to transition. Because guess what? Gender dysphoria can give you depression. People can be majorly depressed as a result of gender dysphoria because it involves a very high degree of body dysmorphia. Especially, God, for trans people who are forced to go through puberty with the sex that they don't identify with, or with this, through the sex puberty that they don't identify with, it can be a horrifying experience. It's real life body horror for these people to, if they're a trans man, to be like developing breasts and their voice being made more feminine and like having the severe mood swings that are associated with that time of the month, having that time of the month, and likewise for trans women, growing facial hair, having the Adam's apple become more prominent, growing hair in general, puberty is when that starts to happen a lot more. It can evoke a genuine sense of disgust at your own body, and it is truly tragic, and Republicans are weaponizing that tragedy to then say, if you are experiencing this tragedy, you will be wholly ineligible and barred from receiving trans gender-affirming care. Robert Fisher, the spokesman for LGBT rights group Promo, said he was not aware of similar restrictions elsewhere. He's quoted as saying, he's essentially attacking the entire trans community at this point. It's no longer just about children. He's saying this about the Attorney General, essentially the top lawyer in the state. Puberty blockers' effect is easily reversible. These clowns have no clue what they're even talking about. Shock. The consequences are disastrous. Yeah, must be in most cases, yeah. Cause yourself a very damaging thing to your confidence and happiness. Oh yeah, like I experienced like self-hatred as a result of having depression. I imagine that's probably a small fraction of what trans people experience, being forced into a social category that they don't identify with, don't agree with, and don't want imposed upon them. Like, almost literally being forcibly directed into being a man when they don't want to, or being a woman when they don't want to, or having any set gender identity when they don't want to. And yes, puberty blockers are completely reversible. The only thing that you need to do to stop taking to stop the effect of puberty blockers or hormone blockers is to not take them. Because and sometimes if you've been on puberty blockers for long enough, right? If you started at like 10 years old and you're on them for 7 or 8 years, even 10 years, so you didn't go through puberty, you could technically artificially induce puberty. Even if you ride the entire thing out, do them for as long as it would even be useful to do them, you can still reverse their effects if it becomes at all necessary or desired. But yeah, you know, Republicans don't care about that, and they don't know what they're talking about. What their agenda is basically just conformity at all costs. They're too young to decide for themselves. Yeah, that's true. In some cases, this is, you know, even with parental consent, this would bar people from transitioning. That argument, you know, as much as the argument is still even wrong, because a lot of the kids in question that would be affected by this are of the medical age of consent. I believe 15 or 16 in a lot of places is the age at which you no longer need your parents' consent to make medical decisions about yourself. Now, these bills would apply to kids who even have their parents' consent. So even if the parents are supportive, the state will still keep them at arm's length from, let's be honest, life-saving medical care. Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to say. The Republicans are just chronically disingenuous. They are driven by a hatred so deep that you could only root it out of them by probably lobotomizing them. More so than they have already by, like, hyperfixating on trans people. Because let's be real, trans people live in these people's heads rent-free. And look, part of this is also, like, the fault of chronically conservative social norms in this country. I have no doubt that if there were much more long-standing norms of trans acceptance and queer acceptance, Republicans would be way more okay with their Pornhub search history. Because a lot of Republicans have been exposed for searching trans porn on Pornhub. Anybody who is anti-trans, you know, has like a folder with a stash of trans porn, or like that is their full search history or whatever.